I never imagined that accepting a job offer would destroy my marriage, tear my family apart, and force me to choose between the life I built and the person I was always meant to be. My name is Sarah, I'm 34 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is something I've never shared with anyone outside my closest circle. This is the story of how one decision changed everything, and how the person I trusted most became the one who betrayed me in the worst possible way. It all started 6 months ago when I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My husband, David, and I had been married for 8 years. We had what everyone considered a stable life: a modest house in the suburbs, 2 cars, weekend barbecues with neighbors, and plans to start a family soon. David worked as an accountant at a local company, and we were comfortable, if not exactly thriving. But I always felt like something was missing, like I was capable of so much more than what my current position allowed me to explore. Then came the email that would change everything. It was from a prestigious marketing agency in New York City, one of the biggest names in the industry. They had seen my portfolio online and wanted to interview me for a senior creative director position. The salary was almost triple what I was making, and it was the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. I was ecstatic, nervous, and terrified all at once. When I told David that night over dinner, I expected him to share my excitement. Instead, his face went cold. "New York?" he said, putting down his fork with a clatter that made me flinch. "Sarah, we have a life here. Our families are here. We've been talking about having kids. How does any of that fit with you moving to New York?" I tried to explain that it was just an interview, that nothing was decided yet, but I could see the fear in his eyes. And maybe something else too. Something I couldn't quite identify at the time. He spent the next week trying to convince me not to go, listing all the reasons why Charlotte was better, why our current life was enough. But every time he spoke, I felt a growing resentment building inside me. Why couldn't he be happy for me? Why was it always about what he wanted, what made him comfortable? And if you're watching this story unfold and wondering what happens next, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes, because what I discovered about my husband was something I never saw coming. I went to the interview anyway. I took a day off work, told David I was visiting an old college friend, and flew to New York. The moment I stepped into that sleek office building in Manhattan, with its glass walls and view of the city skyline, I felt something awaken inside me. The interview lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, they offered me the position on the spot. The creative director, a woman named Michelle who radiated confidence and success, shook my hand and said, "Sarah, we see something special in you. Don't let anyone convince you to play small." Those words echoed in my mind during the entire flight back to Charlotte. When I got home that night, David was waiting up for me, sitting in the dark living room with just the lamp on. He asked how my friend was, and I lied to his face. I told him it was a good visit, that we had caught up on old times. The guilt tasted bitter in my mouth, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. I needed time to think, to process what this opportunity meant for me, for us, for our future. The next few weeks were torture. The agency called me twice asking for my decision, and each time I asked for more time. David sensed something was off. He became more attentive, more affectionate, taking me out to nice dinners, planning weekend getaways to the mountains. It was like he was trying to remind me of all the reasons to stay, but it had the opposite effect. Every romantic gesture felt like a chain. Every "I love you" felt like a plea for me to remain small, to stay in the box he had built for our life together. Then came the night I'll never forget. We were at his company's annual dinner, one of those corporate events where everyone pretends to enjoy rubber chicken and forced small talk. I was sitting next to David when his phone buzzed on the table. He had gone to the bathroom, leaving his phone face up. The message preview made my blood run cold. "I miss you. When can we meet again? Last week wasn't enough." My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone. I knew his passcode. We had always been open about that, or so I thought. I opened the message thread and felt the world tilt beneath me. Months of messages, photos I couldn't bear to look at for more than a second, conversations filled with intimacy and promises, and the person on the other end? Jennifer, his colleague from work, the same woman he had told me was just a friend. the one he occasionally mentioned grabbing lunch with. If you're still watching, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this one. Your support means everything, and there's so much more to this story that you need to hear. I sat there frozen, the phone in my hand, as the room buzzed with conversation around me. My mind raced through every moment of the past few months, seeing them all through a new lens. The late nights he claimed were for closing the books at quarter end. The new cologne. The way he had been so eager for me to stay in Charlotte, not because he loved our life together, but because he was living a double life, and my absence would complicate that. When David returned to the table, I handed him his phone without a word. He looked at the screen, saw what was open, and his face went completely white. "Sarah, I can explain," he whispered, but I was already standing up, grabbing my purse, walking toward the exit with my head held high even though I was shattering inside. He followed me to the parking lot, grabbing my arm as I reached our car. "Please, just let me explain. It didn't mean anything. I love you. I was scared of losing you. And I made a terrible mistake." A mistake. He called months of betrayal a mistake, as if he had accidentally knocked over a glass of water instead of destroying our marriage. I drove home alone that night while he stayed at the event, probably to do damage control with his colleagues. I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by photos of our wedding, our vacations, our life together, and realized that none of it had been real. Or maybe it had been real once, but somewhere along the way, he had decided it wasn't enough, and instead of talking to me about it, he had found comfort in someone else's arms. The next morning, I called the agency in New York and accepted the position. David came home to find me packing. We had the kind of fight that neighbors probably heard through the walls. Lots of shouting, accusations, tears. He begged me not to leave, said he would end things with Jennifer, that we could go to counseling, that our marriage was worth fighting for. But I looked at him and realized I didn't want to fight for something that he had already destroyed. And more than that, I realized I had been using our marriage as an excuse to avoid taking risks, to avoid pursuing the career I truly wanted. "You did me a favor," I told him, and I meant it. "You showed me that I was settling, not just with you, but with my entire life." I moved to New York 2 weeks later. My parents were devastated, begging me to reconsider, to think about David's family, to remember that marriage takes work. But I was done doing all the work while he reaped the benefits. My friends were divided. Some supported me, others thought I was throwing away my marriage over one mistake. But they didn't see those messages. They didn't feel the betrayal that cut so deep I wasn't sure I'd ever trust anyone again. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. So if you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a great time. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about myself and what I wanted. The first month in New York was brutal. I was starting an intense new job, living in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn that cost twice what our mortgage in Charlotte had been, and processing the end of my marriage all at once. I threw myself into work, staying at the office until 10 or 11 at night, taking on every project, proving to Michelle and the team that they had made the right choice in hiring me. The work was challenging and exhilarating, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was using my brain to its full capacity. Then I met Alex. He was a freelance photographer the agency had hired for a major campaign I was leading. Tall, dark hair that was always slightly messy, wearing vintage band t-shirts under expensive blazers. He had this way of seeing the world that was completely different from anyone I'd ever known. We started working closely together, spending long hours in creative meetings, and I found myself looking forward to those sessions more than anything else in my day. It started innocently enough, grabbing coffee after meetings, talking about art and music and life. He told me about his divorce 3 years earlier, how his ex-wife had wanted a traditional life while he needed freedom and creativity. I told him about David, about the betrayal, about how I was rebuilding myself from scratch. Alex listened in a way David never had, asking questions, remembering details, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. One night, after a particularly successful client presentation, a group of us went out to celebrate. The bar was crowded, music pulsing through the space, and Alex and I ended up in a corner booth talking for hours while everyone else danced or drank. At some point, his hand was on my knee, and I didn't move it away. The air between us crackled with possibility, With something I hadn't felt in so long, I had almost forgotten what it was like to be desired, to feel that magnetic pull toward another person. "I should go," I said, but I didn't move. Alex looked at me with those intense dark eyes and said, "Should you? Or do you just think you should?" That question unraveled something in me. For so long, I had been doing what I thought I should do, being the good wife, the supportive partner, putting everyone else's needs before my own. And where had it gotten me? Betrayed and alone in a new city, starting over at 34. So when Alex leaned in and kissed me, I kissed him back. It was soft at first, tentative, and then desperate, hungry, like we were both starving for something real and honest. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story involves a choice I never thought I'd have to make, and I still don't know if I made the right one. We ended up back at his loft in Williamsburg, a space filled with photographs on the walls, vintage cameras on shelves, and large windows overlooking the city lights. That night wasn't just physical, though the connection between us was undeniable. It was emotional, raw, and healing in a way I didn't expect. Alex made me feel beautiful, interesting, worthy of attention and desire. With David, especially in those last few years, intimacy had become routine, scheduled, almost obligatory. With Alex, everything felt alive and present and intense. But the next morning brought guilt crashing down on me. I was still technically married. The divorce papers had been filed, but not finalized. I had always been someone who followed the rules, who did things the right way, and here I was in bed with another man, while still legally bound to David. Alex sensed my panic and pulled me close. "Sarah, you're allowed to move forward. You're allowed to want things for yourself. David broke your trust and your marriage. You don't owe him your loyalty anymore." His words made sense logically, but emotionally I was a mess. I spent the next few weeks in a fog, seeing Alex regularly but keeping it quiet from everyone at work. We would meet at his place, spend nights talking about everything and nothing, making each other laugh, building something that felt both exciting and terrifying. He never pushed me for more than I was ready to give, and that patience made me fall for him even harder. Then David started calling. At first I ignored him, but he was persistent. He left voicemails saying he had ended things with Jennifer, that he was in therapy, that he realized he had taken me for granted. He said he wanted to fight for our marriage, that 8 years was worth more than one terrible mistake. His mother called too, and then his sister, all of them telling me I was being selfish, that I was abandoning my family, that I owed David a second chance. The pressure was enormous. I had always been close with David's family. His mother had treated me like a daughter, and the thought of losing those relationships too felt like another layer of loss on top of everything else. One weekend, David flew to New York without telling me and showed up at my apartment building. When I came home from dinner with Alex, there he was, sitting on the steps, looking exhausted and desperate. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me," he said. We went to a coffee shop down the street, and he poured his heart out. He told me about the pressure he had felt about money, about starting a family, about feeling like he was losing me to my ambitions. He said the affair with Jennifer was an escape, a way to feel important and desired when he felt like he was disappointing me every day. He cried, something I had only seen him do once before at his father's funeral, and my heart broke all over again. Not because I wanted him back, but because I saw how broken he was too. If you're invested in this story and want to know how it ends, please hit that subscribe button. I promise you won't regret it because the decision I had to make next was the hardest of my life. "I forgive you," I told David in that coffee shop, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. You destroyed something that can't be rebuilt, and more importantly, I've changed. I'm not the same person who left Charlotte 6 months ago. I'm building a life here that I love. I'm happy, David. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. He asked if there was someone else, and I was honest with him. I told him about Alex, about how it started, about how I felt alive again. David's face crumpled with pain, but there was also resignation there. He knew it was over. We sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours, talking through 8 years of marriage, acknowledging both the good times and the ways we had failed each other. By the end of it, we had agreed to move forward with the divorce amicably, to divide our assets fairly, to try to preserve some respect for what we had once shared. Walking back to my apartment that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The guilt that had been weighing on me lifted because I had been honest, had faced the hard conversation head-on. I called Alex and told him everything. He came over, held me while I cried one last time for the end of my marriage, and then we ordered Thai food and watched terrible movies until I fell asleep on his couch. But life has a way of never being simple. 3 weeks after David went back to Charlotte, I found out I was pregnant. I had been feeling off for a few days, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted by noon, emotional in ways that seemed extreme even for someone going through a divorce. I bought a test on my way home from work one day, took it in the bathroom of my apartment, and watched as 2 pink lines appeared. I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour, just staring at that positive test, my mind racing through all the implications. The timing made it impossible to know for certain who the father was. David and I had been intimate a few times in that last month before I found out about Jennifer. And I had been with Alex. The math was murky, the possibilities terrifying. I hadn't told either of them yet, couldn't figure out how to even begin that conversation. Alex noticed something was wrong. We were at dinner, a nice Italian place in the West Village, and I could barely eat. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Talk to me, Sarah. What's going on?" I told him right there in that restaurant, with couples around us celebrating anniversaries and first dates. I watched his face cycle through shock, confusion, fear, and then something that looked like determination. "Okay," he said simply. "Okay. We'll figure this out." "You don't understand," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if it's yours or David's." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Alex pulled his hand back and I watched him process that information. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "What do you want to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? I was 34, had just started my dream job, was barely settled in a new city, was going through a divorce, and was falling in love with a man I had known for only a few months. Bringing a baby into this chaos seemed impossible. But the thought of not having this baby felt equally impossible. Subscribe if you want to know what choice I made, because I'm about to tell you something that might shock you. I decided to keep the baby. I called David and told him about the pregnancy and the possibility that he might be the father. His response surprised me. He was cautiously hopeful, saying that regardless of paternity, he wanted to be supportive, that maybe this was a sign that we were meant to work things out. But I shut that down immediately. Having a baby together, if he was the father, didn't mean resurrecting a dead marriage. It meant co-parenting, nothing more. Alex's reaction was more complicated. He was scared, which was understandable, but he also didn't run. He said he needed time to think, to process what this meant for us, for the relationship we were building. I gave him space, even though it hurt to watch him pull away. For a week, I barely heard from him, and I prepared myself for the possibility that this would be the end of us. Then he showed up at my apartment with flowers and a book about pregnancy. "I've been thinking," he said, and I realized something. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarah. I don't know if this baby is mine biologically, but I want to be here for this. For you. Whatever happens, whatever we find out, I want to build this life with you." I fell into his arms and cried, from relief, from fear, from hormones, from everything. We agreed that we would do a paternity test once the baby was born, that we would be honest with David about everything, and that regardless of the results, Alex wanted to be a father to this child. The next 6 months were a blur. My job at the agency was demanding, but Michelle was incredibly supportive when I told her about the pregnancy. Alex and I moved in together, a bigger apartment in Brooklyn with room for a nursery. David and I finalized our divorce, and he signed papers saying he would take a paternity test, and if he was the father, would pay child support and have visitation rights. His family was upset about the entire situation, but I had learned to stop letting other people's opinions dictate my choices. My daughter was born on a cold February morning, 6 pounds and perfect in every way. I named her Emma, and the moment they placed her in my arms, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Alex was there for the delivery, cutting the cord, crying tears of joy. David flew up the next day to meet her, and I saw the love in his eyes too, even before we knew for sure if she was his. 2 weeks later, we did the paternity test. The waiting period for the results was excruciating. Alex and I didn't talk about it much, both of us afraid of what the answer would mean. David called every other day, trying to sound casual but clearly anxious. When the results came, I opened the envelope alone. I needed to process the information before sharing it with anyone else. I read the words 3 times to make sure I understood. The probability of paternity, 99.9%. David was Emma's biological father. Please subscribe because what happened next is something I never expected, and I need your support to finish telling this story. I called David first. He wept on the phone, saying he knew it, that he felt it when he held her. He asked if he could come back to New York the following weekend to see Emma again, to start figuring out a custody arrangement. I agreed, even though the thought of sharing Emma with him filled me with anxiety. She was mine, had been growing inside me while I built this new life, and now I had to share her with the man who had betrayed me. Telling Alex was harder. He had bonded with Emma those first 2 weeks, waking up with her for night feedings, changing diapers, singing to her in the early morning hours. I sat him down in our living room and told him the results. I watched his face carefully, looking for signs of withdrawal or relief, but what I saw was complicated grief. I knew it was a possibility, he said quietly, but I guess I had hoped. Alex, this doesn't change anything about us. You're still her father in every way that matters. You're the one who's here, who's building a life with us. But it did change things, even if we didn't want to admit it. David became a regular presence in our lives, flying up twice a month to see Emma. He was trying to be a good father, and I couldn't fault him for that, but every time he was in our apartment, I felt the tension. Alex was gracious, stepping back when David was there, but I could see it wearing on him. Then, when Emma was 4 months old, David asked me to move back to Charlotte. He said it would be easier for co-parenting, that Emma deserved to have both parents in the same city, that his family wanted to be part of her life. He even said he had found a great job opportunity for me at a growing agency there, that I wouldn't have to sacrifice my career. And that's where I am now, standing at another impossible crossroads. Do I stay in New York with Alex, the man I love, the man who shows up for me and Emma every single day, and maintain this complicated co-parenting relationship with David from a distance? Or do I move back to Charlotte for Emma's sake, to give her the chance to have both parents present, even if it means leaving behind the life I've built and potentially losing Alex? My parents think I should move back. They say Emma deserves to grow up knowing both sides of her family, that I'm being selfish by keeping her in New York. David's family is even more vocal, calling me regularly, trying to convince me that Charlotte is the right choice. They've even offered to help with childcare, to support me financially if needed. But Alex says he'll support whatever decision I make, but I can see the fear in his eyes. He's terrified that if I leave, I won't come back, that David will find some way to convince me to give our marriage another shot for Emma's sake. And maybe he's right to be afraid, because part of me does wonder if Emma deserves the chance to have her biological parents together, even if that means sacrificing my own happiness. Michelle at the agency has offered me the option to work remotely if I move back to Charlotte, which would mean I could keep my job and this new life I've built professionally. But she's also made it clear that my trajectory at the company would be different, that being in the office is important for advancement, especially in such a creative field. So here I am, awake at 3 a.m. while Emma sleeps in her crib, and Alex sleeps beside me, trying to figure out what the right answer is. Do I prioritize Emma's relationship with her biological father and extended family, even if it means potentially losing the love I've found with Alex and the independence I've fought so hard to achieve? Or do I stay here, build the life I want, and risk Emma resenting me someday for keeping her away from her father? Before I tell you what I'm leaning toward, make sure you're subscribed, because I need to hear from you. I need your perspective on this impossible situation. There are moments when I watch Alex with Emma, seeing him cradle her so gently, singing her the songs he makes up, and I think, how could I leave this? How could I take Emma away from the man who, despite not being her biological father, loves her as if she was his own. He's talked about adoption, about making it official if I would agree to it, about building a family together that includes Emma, and maybe someday other children too. But then David sends photos of the nursery he set up in his apartment in Charlotte. Pictures of his parents holding a frame with Emma's ultrasound photo. Messages about how much they all miss her and want to be part of her life. And I feel the weight of that responsibility. The knowledge that my choices don't just affect me anymore, but will shape Emma's entire childhood, her sense of identity, her relationship with both sides of her family. The truth is, I don't know what to do. I thought by now, after everything I've been through, I would have figured out how to make these impossible decisions. But this one feels bigger than all the others. It's not just about my career or my happiness or even my relationship with Alex. It's about Emma's future, about the kind of life I want to give her, about the kind of mother I want to be. Part of me is angry that I'm in this position at all. If David hadn't cheated, if I hadn't left Charlotte, if I had made different choices along the way, maybe life would be simpler. But then I wouldn't have this job I love, I wouldn't have met Alex, I wouldn't have discovered who I really am when I'm not trying to fit into someone else's version of my life. I've talked to a therapist about all of this. She keeps asking me what I would tell Emma to do if she were in the same situation 25 years from now. Would I want her to sacrifice her happiness for obligation? Would I want her to stay in a situation that doesn't fulfill her because it seems like the right thing to do? Or would I want her to be brave enough to choose the life that makes her feel most alive, most herself, most happy? When I frame it that way, the answer seems obvious. But the reality of actually making that choice, of living with the consequences, of potentially watching Emma struggle with questions about why we live so far from her dad, that's terrifying. David has promised that if I move back, he won't pressure me to get back together, that he respects my relationship with Alex and just wants to co-parent effectively. But I know him. I know how persuasive he can be, how his family operates, how easy it would be to get pulled back into that world. And I've worked too hard to find myself to risk losing her again. So what am I going to do? I honestly don't know yet. I have 2 weeks to give David an answer about Charlotte. I have the rest of my life to live with whatever choice I make. And I have this beautiful 4-month-old daughter who deserves a mother brave enough to model the kind of life I want her to have. One where she prioritizes her own happiness, pursues her dreams, and doesn't apologize for taking up space in the world. But here's what I want from you because I can't make this decision alone. What would you do in my place? Would you stay in New York with Alex, building the unconventional family that feels right even if it's complicated? Or would you move back to Charlotte, give Emma the traditional 2-parent proximity that society says children need, even if it means potentially sacrificing the love and independence you found? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would do, what you think is best for Emma, what you would want if you were in my shoes. And please subscribe to this channel because I'll be back with an update once I make my decision. I need your support, your wisdom, your perspective as I navigate this impossible choice. This is my life right now, messy, complicated, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. I thought leaving Charlotte would be the hardest thing I ever did, but it turns out that was just the beginning. Every choice leads to another impossible choice, and all I can do is try to make the ones that feel most true to who I am and who I want Emma to see when she looks at me. So please, subscribe, comment, and help me figure out what comes next. Because right now, at 3:30 in the morning with my daughter sleeping peacefully and the man I love beside me and another man hundreds of miles away who loves the same child, I genuinely don't know what the right answer is. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just what life looks like when you're brave enough to choose yourself, even when it means everything gets more complicated. What would you do?